Fruity Love Philter has a bunch of really great modulation options, and let's dive into what they are and some techniques you can use in your tracks today. So first off, let me really quick play for you the example audio we will be using. This is a track I've been working on. Yep, so that's what we're going to be using. And we've got down here some different modulation options. So the techniques themselves are easy to understand once you understand what modulation is. So the easiest example of modulation I can think of is, let's say you're in your car driving down the road listening to some music, and you reach over and you turn down the volume. You turning down the volume, you are modulating the volume. You're turning it down, and you hear the effect of what you're doing. You don't hear your hand like turning. You don't hear that directly. You hear the volume go down. So you don't hear modulation directly. You hear the effect of modulation. And it's a good example because it's a very slow example. You can reach out and do it. It happens slow enough that you can physically do it. But let's say that you took that volume knob and you were able to turn it on and off 100%, all the way on, all the way off, 100 times a second. You can't do that, but audio can. You can have a sine wave that oscillates 100 times a second, turn something on and off 100 times a second. And because of that, modulation can get very complicated, and we can get into what's called audio rate modulation, but you also have slower signals, such as you turning the knob. That's also modulation. And so this opens up a lot of worlds for us because we can have signals turn the knobs for us. We can have them do it the exact same way every time. We can be very precise. It's pretty beautiful. Anytime you've actually automated anything, technically you're doing a form of modulation. So inside of the Fruity Love Philter, there are these modulation options. We have things that, turn things on and off over time. Like I just described, and we would call this a low frequency oscillator because it happens very slowly. We have a mod X and a mod Y, which links up knobs to how we move the X and the Y around. And we've also got a really interesting envelope follower that we'll save for the end. And this is going to get a little bit more advanced when we get to this one. So let's go ahead and start off at the beginning with the pattern. Now there are 10 patterns you can have. And when the Fruity Love Philter is in focus, this is important because I've seen people think this was a bug. When you play notes, specifically the notes between I think it's like C5 and B5, I can't remember. But when you play notes, it'll actually switch between patterns, and this can screw up your sound. But as soon as it's out of focus, let me click somewhere else. You see how the text grayed out right there? I'm playing the same notes, but now it's triggering a sound instead of triggering patterns. So this is something that I think was intended for live performance, but essentially what you could do is you could draw in a shape to tell a parameter how to behave. So here we've got all these parameters, kind of like how we had a knob attached to our volume control in the car. We have a volume area that we can have it be turned on and off via these different ways. We've got the ability to change panning, the ability to move the cutoff knob, all these wonderful things. So what I'm doing here, let's go ahead and look at our first example. I've got this top loop I've created out of hi-hats. And let's go to a section with that going on. And it's pretty tight right now. It's pretty much what I want. But if I come in here and bypass this, that's not tight, and that's not what I want. So what I'm doing is I said, hey, I'm going to come in, I'm going to change the volume of these hi-hats. And this is great for hi-hats, top loops, any kind of loop that you have that's rhythmic in nature. You can do this with. You can use it actually to do some side chaining. I wouldn't recommend it, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But let's go through our first most basic example. So let me go ahead. Let's start from scratch because I think it's easiest when we all start from scratch. So I'm going to get rid of this. I'm going to open up a Fruity Love Philter. And there's actually a number of plugins that do similar things, such as Gatekeeper, Grosbeat, or Volume Shaper. But we're going to be taking a look at how to do this with one you probably already have. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the filter. Now I might be going, why am I turning the filter off? Well, I just want to change the volume. I don't want it to be filtered at all. And this will actually still have filtering. If I play it, there's filtering there. You could bring the bands up And that's just the filter essentially being open, but this can color your sound. And if you switch to any other filter type here, you could get coloration. So just turn it off, which is kind of ironic because usually you're opening this, right, to use a filter. So we're going to choose volume, and I want to start a pattern. I'm going to turn it on, and I don't know if this is true for everyone, but by default, tempo sync is on. So that means that one bar is just 4 of these smaller rectangles. So I want eighth notes like this. But if I play this, you see the volume is now permanently off. Well, the reason is I didn't set loop points, and so it runs through this and then just hits the end, and now it's like off forever. So that's a problem. So I'm going to go ahead and right click this dot and choose not loop start, sustain loop end. And at the beginning, we're going to choose loop start. Now it's going to do this. I like to add just another point. We'll drag this one out. And now I can choose a shape, and it will loop through at eighth notes. And we've got ourselves here a much tighter riff. Now I had something more like this. I mean, you can pick all kinds of loops. You can get longer. You don't have to have something that's this short. We can make it a full bar and have it come up and down twice. You could use this to make some cool wobbly sounds. We could come into our cutoff. For example, let's say that we do want a filter. Let's make it a low pass. And let's move this cutoff. Well, let's come into the cutoff. We could turn a pattern on for this. And we can go ahead and make this the loop sustain end. We could have it come down. And let's make this a start. Move this up. But we can have a cutoff, and now we'll have this sort of swishy sound as the cutoff moves around. We can move the resonance up. And you can have some pretty good times getting some sound design going, which we'll look at here in a little bit. So that's the pattern for you. And there's a quick technique you can use in your tracks today. Anytime you open up a loop or you have a sound that's maybe it's got too much verb on it, you can open it up and dial in a pattern. Now you might notice I have Gatekeeper, and it's actually got a very similar shape to the one I drew at first, the flat one with the curve down. I like Gatekeeper just because it's a little easier to draw patterns out, and it has a couple other goodies inside it. And I bought the plugin, so I want to use what I spent my money on. There's another key advantage though the Gatekeeper has that the Fruity Love Philter does not. So you'll see videos where people say, hey, you can sidechain using the Fruity Love Philter. And what they do is they just create a pattern like we've done here. And to me, this is like the worst way to use. This is not a plugin you want to use for sidechaining, because there's no way to trigger this only when you want. Like if I play this, it'll just keep sidechaining through the hi-hats. And you know, if this is, I wouldn't really even consider this sidechaining. It would pump through the hi-hats like that. So we can create holes in sounds. Like if we had a kick or something, we could create a hole in a bass and have it do that. But there's no way to trigger this, only when that happens. So with Gatekeeper, let me show you an example. I have an example here. If we go over to the sub, and I've got a Gatekeeper, and its envelope doesn't continuously run. It only runs when I give it a note that says trigger the envelope. So this means that, and I actually have those notes right here. There are all these notes. When these notes happen, there will be, the Gatekeeper will activate. That sounds so cool to say. And you will have a pumping effect. And this is great because when I do the drums, let me grab the drums here. That's what's going to go on. And this is fantastic for what I want to do. And it can receive notes. It's been made to do that. I don't know why the Fruity Love Philter can't do it, but for whatever reason, native plugins are a nightmare to do this sort of thing with currently. There's I've seen people try and create workarounds. I actually haven't found one for the Fruity Love Philter, and I wouldn't even care if they added an option to do it directly. That would be great. But if it's some crazy workaround, I'm just going to use the other plugins. They're going to do it right away, way easier. So anyways, that's the pattern. Now we also have an LFO, and this is another common one. We could change this to, it's tempo sync. So let's go ahead and sync this up so that we want a sawtooth, so we can move the skew knob here. and then bring the speed over. And we could turn this on instead, and we could get a similar effect, except for this is going to be an LFO. So it'll be continuously running, a low frequency oscillator. So it's going to be just doing this shape over and over. And we could instead change this one with the skew. So for example, maybe we like this one. We can go ahead and come down here to copy state. We can turn this one off. Maybe we don't want to do the volume thing. Maybe we want to move the low pass filter. I can go to cutoff, and I can go down to paste state and just have it work right on the cutoff. So we've selected the cutoff and we've changed the LFO to do it. And we can bring the resonance down to take away all that harshness. And you can actually automate these down here. So this can actually be a really, really great way to get some interesting rhythms and move things in and out. So that's LFOs. Up next, we have mod X and Y. So we have over here this mod X and Y. And sometimes it's handy to just be able to move this around and have it musically respond. So maybe I want, as I move over on X, the cutoff to open up. So what I could do is I can come to the cutoff, go to the modulation tab X, and say when X is all the way on the negative side, which you can see where it's at with this line. And when I move it all the way to the negative side, it's going to be at the 0. It's going to be with the cutoff all the way off. And when X is all the way up, I want it to have the cutoff completely open. So now, there it is. Now, you might want to do something more like this so that it turns on quicker as you move it over. We could scale it a bit better. And this can be really great if you have something that you want to have just this really unusual behavior with the cutoff like this, and you want to automate through it. You could have it achieve all these very sudden levels. And this is a lot more like kind of moving the volume knob with your hand. And now what I'll do is I'll typically automate these. So we can get these sort of filtered gating effects extremely easily. And if you want this to be automatic, you could just make a pattern that does it, and off you go. You can also do it for the y-axis. So as you move up and down, you could have it. We could have this control the resonance, for example. So maybe we'll link. Now be careful. If it's yellow, that means I'm using it, and I want to take this off. We're going to go to resonance and add it to the resonance. So now as I move around, we can get some interesting effects there. Let's come in. And now part of the reason it was all choppy was because of this insane X thing that I had here. So I'm going to go ahead and get the pencil tool and right click to very quickly delete a lot of things at once. Also, by the way, if you're working in the pattern, sometimes you want to move a control around, and you see how this is sliding over here? You can turn this off, and now it won't slide anymore. So this yellow double arrow, what do they call this? Sliding succeeding point / region. So that's not catchy at all. We'll just call it the yellow double arrow. And so there we go. And then finally, the last one is extremely interesting. Let's go ahead and start on the default patch because I've changed a bunch of stuff. So here's the default patch. This is an envelope follower. So whatever is coming into the plugin, it's going to look at the amplitude of it. And if it's higher, it's going to get further along this line. And this will allow us to modulate something with it. So for example, that hi-hat comes in, it starts off very loud and then it gets softer. So we could link this to the cutoff. And when the hi-hat hits, it's going to turn it up and then come down. It's following the volume shape of the hi-hat. So if I go ahead, I make this very positive. So you have positive and negative. You can hear it sweeping up. And I can go the other way and sweep down. And it'll sweep down. The louder it is, the further it will go in. And that will modulate it more. So that is the envelope follower. This is one where if you want to, this is actually a lot more useful, I think, in mixing sometimes and in sound design too. If you have something that you want to drive, maybe you've got a clap sound or an arpeggiator or something, and you want it to respond with every single note, you could use the amplitude of each individual thing and have it be triggered. So this is kind of like a filter that changes frequency depending on how loud it is. That's what an envelope follower is very useful for. And that is all the modulation sources. So I'm using a couple of these ideas throughout here. If we go ahead and delete these. So the main one I use though is I love using shapes like this to clean things up. I'll grab the Fruity Love Philter all the time for that kind of stuff. But there's also a sound design thing I'd like to show you. Here on the yoink sound, we can come in, we can add a Fruity Love Philter to it, and we could take advantage of that weird envelope follower. So when the sound comes in, right, it's a very sudden sound. I could say, hey, you know, on the cutoff, let's have it move the cutoff, and we'll have it move the cutoff upwards. And now we're going to get this extra sound from the filter and the movement around that can color the sound. And so right now, that's not exactly the most tasteful, but we can, of course, tune it into something that could be cool. And so we could actually go the other way. And there's a couple of controls here that are important. For the envelope follower, the attack is how fast it happens. So I want a fast attack. And release is how slow does it go back down. So if you choose a very fast attack and release, you get distortion. You can hear that on the edge of the sound. If we choose a slower release and a fast attack, that'll probably be better for us. And you notice this use 1. I leave this off pretty much all the time. But it changes what the envelope follower sees. It can either use what's coming through the first envelope here, or when it's off, it uses whatever's just coming directly into the plugin to generate this envelope. So that's what the use 1 means. It's something that I've left off 100% of the time so far. If I ever turn it on, maybe I'll make a video about it. So, okay, let's go ahead. Let's turn it on as we go. And something that can be kind of cool, let's just go a little crazy with it. Let's dial back the resonance so it's not so bright. So we could have it come down and we could sort of dial in the sound but keep the shape of the sound there. Or there's different filter types. Some of them have extra knobs. Like there's a low pass with a distortion. So there's some gain. There it is, drive. Low pass 3 has a drive knob that I think is really cool. And so we're going to turn this on and we can get some distortion as it moves. So if you want to add some edge to a sound, you can do that. And I think that this actually works out all right here. And so on and so forth. So maybe we'll take this away and do whatever you want to do, right? It's your sound design. You can choose different filters, get a different vibe, and have the envelope follower essentially do what you want to it. And you also have an envelope control here. There's a nuance here that I have discovered that I was previously unaware of. The envelope control seems to only affect the cutoff. And if you hover over it, it actually tells you cutoff envelope, LFO, and the envelope follower amount. But if you do one, and if you do one on the cutoff, it will work. Like for example, here's one on the cutoff. Let me turn off the volume one. And this is actually one of the great uses of the envelope depth is it gives you a way to morph between two sounds. So we could have like some double time sound right here and it comes down to something like this. And right now the depth's at 0, so it's not working. And then we can morph it or it just automate this back and forth. This is a good example to show. So here we've got this thing, we'd like to flip it. So if you come in here, there is a flip vertically option. So we'll flip it. Maybe dial this back a bit some. And maybe 3 is too many. It's a little much for our friend here. So we'll go like this. That's a bit cleaner. And you can see we can actually morph between two sounds, which is another really great use for the envelope depth. And you see these kinds of things in all kinds of plugins. It's almost always there, filter envelope with some sort of a depth or an amount knob. So a very common thing to be able to modulate to morph between two kinds of sounds. It can be useful rhythmically. But it does not work. Let's turn this off. This knob doesn't seem to affect any of the others. So when it says cut off envelope, it means just the cutoff. If you do one on the volume, for example, nothing. No difference whatsoever. And there is a loop point here. See, I've got a sustain loop end and a loop start up here at the top. So it doesn't work there. Just be aware of that. But that's the modulation sources. There's a bunch of examples of things you can do with it. If you have any questions about this, let me know. If you do something cool with it and make a beat, I'd be happy to check it out. Subscribe and have a blessed day.